Welcome to the FAA Production Studios and the FAA Safety Team's National Resource Center and Sun and Fun Complex located in Lakeland, Florida. Our next presenter is retired from the Cirrus Design program, where he was an air safety investigator and was director of the air safety training for the past 16 years. He's a member of the International Society of Air Safety Investigators and teaches at the NTSB Academy at the Transportation Safety Institute located in Oklahoma City. Also, he makes presentations at numerous fire colleges, fire departments around the country, talking about what to do after the accident. Mike is a Navy veteran, served as a aircraft electrician and aircrew member on the USS Saratoga, involved in Helicopter Support Squadron, HC-6. He earned his Bachelor of Science degree in Management from Embry-Riddle and worked for the Daytona Beach Fire Department as an arson investigator while finishing his degree at Embry-Riddle. He is a commercial pilot with multi-engine and instrument ratings and is a certified airframe and power plant mechanic. Mike has been a member of the EAA since 1974 and has co-founded the EAA Chapter 534 in Leesburg, Florida. He's been involved in numerous aircraft restoration projects, including the Collins Foundation B-24, the All-American and B-17-909 bombers from Tom Riley's Bombertown facility in Kissimmee, Florida. Mike has owned 4 aircraft, a 48 Stinson, a Citabria, a Long Easy that he built and raced in Sun 60, and a 1948 Navion. He's currently working on an F-1 rocket. His topic today is what happens when the phone rings. Let's welcome Mike Bush.
Morning, Walt. Thank you very much. I know it's kind of an unusual title. First of all, I'd like to welcome everyone to Sun and Fun and everyone here in the studio for their support. I was an accident investigator for some time, and as such, we always have to carry the phone with us. And people always knew what I did, but they didn't know what happened after the phone rang and I left, got out of sight. And so that question came up so often that I thought I would put a little presentation together about sort of the behind-scenes things of what we do, because as you can imagine, most accident sites are restrictive. They don't let everybody in, and we do have to do our work. So we are always answering questions about that. But the question foremost in our minds is, why do we investigate accidents? Well, of course, we want to learn what happened, and so that we can learn from those facts and pass it along, so in our hopes that something like that won't happen again. And the other question is, of course, how do you do it? Well, it's a science in a way, and as many accidents as I've had to be with and investigate, I can say there's a sort of sameness about all of them, but at the same time, they're all a little different. Different airplanes, different locations, and different situations. So there's a lot of variables you have to look at. If you work for a manufacturer, a certified manufacturer, the NTSB, the National Transportation Association, expects you to have a qualified accident investigator on call. It's part of the job that a manufacturer has to deal with. He has to provide the support to the NTSB, and a lot of folks don't know that the National Transportation Safety Board has jurisdiction over all civil accidents in this country. They're the boss. They're the ones in charge. But they can't possibly know everything about every airplane out there, and so they do expect us to provide some expertise on our particular airplane. And so as such, if they need us, and only if we're invited to the investigation, they will call us and say, well, look, we need your help. Can you participate? So we wear the phone, and when the phone rings, we got to go. And I think our record in our department was 12 minutes out the door. I think my own personal record was 20 minutes. You've got to travel typically to anywhere, anytime, because you never know where these things happen. They are accidents after all. And you have to be ready to provide professional assistance to these folks. The recurring questions that we also have is, why did it occur, and what can we do to keep this kind of accident from happening again? The board investigates the accident. Okay, they're in charge of it. They are the boss. And so when we get called, we go out there and we do what they ask us to do. Now, typically, in our case, when I was with Cirrus, we were in charge of the airframe portion of the investigation under the guidance of the NTSB. And of course, The other person that can be there is the engine manufacturer. In the case of a commercial airliner, you might have a representative from ALPA there. But other than that, and the FAA, those are the people that are the primary investigators on site. The NTSB will write the report. You can pick these reports up online. If you've never done that, you should do that, ntsb.gov. Under the aviation section, you can look up accidents as far back as 1947 now, I think. They do a good job with that. And so they write the report, and they're also responsible for the site and the security and the safety on the site. And we always want to make sure that, well, we've had one tragedy, we don't want to have another one occur with people stomping around in the wreckage and so forth. It doesn't help our investigation much either when evidence is destroyed. It's evidence and all the things we look at is very perishable. You know, things roll downhill and animals run away with stuff, or it's raining and so forth. A lot of times the wind blows away critical papers or whatever. So we have to get there quickly and try to capture all this evidence and all this information so that we can try to make sense out of what it is we're looking at. One of the problems we have is that sometimes an airplane doesn't even look like an airplane when we get there. Now, the main job, when it's all said and done, is that there's a 5-member board on the National Transportation Safety Board that ultimately will take the report, review it, and then determine the probable cause. They're the only people in this country legally that can do that. And that probable cause is determined by these 5 board members. We say probable cause because typically we can't get every little scrap of information that we need. We can see trends and we can put all the pieces together, but sometimes stuff is still missing, and so we can't say absolute cause. We say probable cause, and by the way, even after the report is written and probable cause has been determined, they will open up a case again if they get new information. And I've seen probable causes actually change from case to case because of that. And when it's all said and done, they sum up what we learned from this accident, and if there's something new, they will try to make recommendations to the people they think are involved. You need to change this, improve that, in an effort to prevent these accidents from happening again. The FAA, of course, also participates in these accidents, and as a matter of fact, they are involved with every single accident that the NTSB does. FAA is a regulatory agency. They make up the rules and enforce them. So they're the guys that can ground you or, or take away your medical or whatnot. But more importantly, and more positively, they have all the paperwork that we need in the event we have an accident. We have to do some investigations. We want to know who the aircraft is registered to and who owned it and who the pilot was and what were his qualifications and so forth. So the FAA has all that data. And so as an automatic policy, they are involved in every single accident as party, as we call it, to the investigation. So FAA is administrative and enforcement primarily, and they will be participating in all the accidents. It is a congressional mandate that the manufacturers may be participants in this, but we do have to be invited. And so typically that phone has to ring before we can go. Now the phone can ring and it can have anybody on the other end of the phone calling us. I mean, I've had police officers call me. I've had you know, just civilians call me, firemen, and they say, hey, you know, there's an airplane down here. We think it might be one of yours. And so the phone can ring anytime, and in fact, in my case, it has rung, I think, at every hour that I can imagine, almost any day and any time. I can't tell you how many dinners I've had to get up from or movies to get away from so that I could launch to go on an accident. But it all starts with the telephone. So the manufacturer, like Cirrus in this case, had me available, and I was the one that launched. For a long time, I was the only guy. And so for 724, I had the phone, and that was it. Later on, as we grew, we had some more people in the department. We got trained up, and so we didn't all have to carry the phone all the time. The engine manufacturer has a similar representative on hand, and typically our experience is gained from a number of sources, which I'll deal with in a second here. But we are qualified to participate in these accidents by virtue of the fact that we know the airplane really well. ALPA is also the third person outside of the federal representatives that could be there. And it doesn't guarantee that we have party status on each accident. We have the congressional mandate of being allowed to if they need us there. So how do the NTSB form an effective team when they get the call and this aircraft goes down somewhere in the middle of nowhere? How do you get all these people together on short notice and be able to run an effective team? And the answer is pretty simple, really. It's professionalism. Everybody knows what they are supposed to do, how they're supposed to do it, and we all work very closely together as a team. The NTSB are past masters at putting teams together. Since they have jurisdiction, you know, a lot of the first responders and fire departments and law enforcement agencies aren't always sure who's in charge. They always think their chief is in charge and so on. And well, in fact, it's the NTSB that is in charge. And so the NTSB has to, you know, kind of take over and run the thing, but they do so very well. It's almost seamless, and they're very professional about how they do this. And we don't have a lot of time on site, and so all this has to come together very quickly. We all are dedicated to this industry and looking for those answers that are pretty elusive. We all have a lot of mutual respect for each other, and as you might imagine, since there aren't very many of us, I would guess there's probably only 200 investigators in the whole world, we pretty well know each other from time to time. We can count on our experience together to help us get by too. And we help each other. The engine guy will help the airframe guy, and so on and so on. And over a period of time, you develop a reputation, which is very important. And so that respect is there, and we all respect each other and really work hard. I like to say it's all about relationships. Now, this is not a good old boy system. It is all based on respect and mutual help and so forth. The skill sets that are required of the accident investigator are many. It's a craft which has to be developed. We don't come into this world with these skills necessarily. We have to learn what it is we're doing and what it is we're looking for, what's important. So it's a craft. And so there's a lot of mentoring and training. I remember one time I was at a sort of a fender bender, and they invited me to come down as sort of part of my experience on the job training. And the investigator in charge from the NTSB was about to get on an airplane and go back to Chicago at the time, and he said, I asked him a couple of questions, and he said, "No, wait a minute." And he looked at his watch, and he pulled out his airline schedule, and we both sat down on a log, and he spent the next 3 hours mentoring me. He could have gone home earlier, but he sat there, right down there and walked me through how things are done. That's the kind of professionalism that you see, and there's a lot of teaching going on kind of behind the scenes. So mentoring and training is extremely important. Of course, you can't beat on-the-job experience because every accident is a little different, and you learn just lots of stuff from each time. There are schools and there are workshops which we all participate in. When we go to these things, typically you're going to see experienced investigators, and we one more time get to talk outside of the accident environment about accidents, and that can be very productive as well. If you're going to be an accident investigator, a lot of people don't understand that you really have to be a good communicator, both written and technical skills, oral, verbal. You've got to be able to talk to people at any level, to ask the right questions, to listen to what it is they're saying. So many people, you know, tend to think they already know what happened before they ever get to the site, and that's a bad thing. You want to be very open-minded. You want to not be predisposed to any particular situation. People always ask me when I was going out the door, "Well, what happened?" I said, "I don't know, but that's what I'm going to find out." You know, we can't possibly know until we get there. So we have to be able to communicate with each other at the site, and then when we get back, we have to be able to talk to other people about it. Common sense, believe it or not, is huge. You know, why is this airplane upside down? Why is it there instead of over there? Now, there is an answer for it. The airplane is trying to talk to you, really. Just like when you're flying one, it's got all these noises and senses and stuff. You can hear the airplane if you listen, okay? Well, it's no different on site, and so common sense is important. And you have to ask those questions. Integrity. You know, you can't go down there and try to be all pompous and show off and tell everybody you know something, because that doesn't work. I mean, all pretenses go away. And in fact, when we get on site, pretty much all the logos and badges come off. We're a team. We work together. And there's no job too small or too large for us to do. If the engine guy needs help digging his engine out of the dirt, well, we all get, you know, time on the shovel and so forth. So we all help each other a lot. It is a team. And you've got to be dedicated to this. This is hard, dirty work. It's not fun. You're out there for, you know, a couple days, 3 days at a time sometimes in the middle of nowhere, terrible conditions. I know one of my co-workers actually spent some time living in a container on site because that's the only hotel that was around. So you've got to be pretty rugged and ready to just kind of make do. So therefore you have to be flexible. You have to think about alternative paths and well, gee, I would rather do this, but I'm going to do that because that's what we need to do today. And so those are the things that you look at. Also, you have to have pretty good imagination. So our pilot skills and our backgrounds in the industry, as mechanics or as pilots and so forth, you get a sense for what the pilot was going through in this accident, the victim maybe. You have to be able to visualize what was going on. Why did this thing come down here? You know, why was he going through the trees like this? So if you can visualize what happened, it makes it easier to understand what happened and therefore why. These are all things that we make as part of the puzzle, and we share our views with each other. And I'm not saying we all agree. On the contrary, we do sometimes have diverse views of what happened. But we walk through it. I remember one particular accident we had that was a particularly difficult one to solve, and we met every day for a month. Every day at the end of the day, we'd sit at this table, and we'd say, well, what happened? And one by one, we'd go around the table and say, I don't know. I don't know. We haven't figured it out. And it was pretty depressing, but eventually we did. So in the end, when you're out there working and it's a lot of pressure and and you're tired and everything else, that's when you're not at your best necessarily, but really it's when you have to be at your best, especially with your coworkers out there. And so it really requires exceptional people skills, I'm told. We all have challenges we have to face at the accident site. As I said, there's some kind of confusion sometimes among the first responders of who's really in charge, because it's kind of a changing scene. I mean, the firemen will typically respond first. If there's a fire, they're out there, and then the law enforcement people show up, and then the medical examiner comes. Well, who's really in charge? And sometimes the people that are in charge are on their way. They're not there yet. The NTSB has to travel. And there are only 10 regional offices in the country, and so it takes time to get out to some of these places. And in the meantime, we all have to get along and follow the leader, so to speak. So there's this continual chain of command that's kind of moving, and a lot of the people that support these accidents don't understand that. Well, wait a minute, I thought he was in charge. Now this guy showed up. Now you're in charge. What's going on? And so we have to be kind and gentle about this, but definitely the NTSB is in charge. And in many of my seminars, I would tell the firemen this, and they weren't sure. Well, my chief is my boss. Well, yes, he is, but in the art of investigation, it's the NTSB. And wreckage can be located a number of places, underwater, up on top of a hill, in somebody's house. They're everywhere, and you just have to deal with it. And it's a calculated risk there. A lot of the pieces may be missing. It's not a given that all of the airplane is going to be where the hole is. We may have had pieces coming off of it for miles, and so we have to go out there and find every one of these pieces as well, because it's all part of the puzzle. Sometimes we do find pieces, but they're in a condition that renders them worthless to us because we can't recognize what they are. They're all burned up or bent up. There's no part number on it, but we know that it's probably from the airplane. And I remember one investigation we had a bunch of people out there walking around helping us pick up pieces. The airplane actually crashed in a prison. So we had some captive labor there, and it was snowing, and we were looking for a very small piece of the aileron system, and so we thought that these prisoners would be willing to help us. And sure enough, they all volunteered because they wanted something new to do, and we gave each of them a little bag, and we marched them out in waves, and we covered the whole prison ground, which was rather enormous. And at the end of the search, we removed their bags from them, and one by one we emptied them on a table, and we started finding things that weren't necessarily airplane parts. We found a windshield wiper and some other stuff, pieces of lawnmowers and whatever you can imagine. And we took one of these pieces back to our engineers because, as a joke, because we knew it was part of a lawnmower, but we weren't sure if he did. So we put it on his desk, and he kept it on his desk for about a week before he figured out, no, that's not an airplane part. So you have to have humor in this job, let me tell you. It's called gallows humor, and sometimes you have to make fun of it, but it's the only way you can keep your sanity, because some of these things, when you get out there, are pretty horrible, as you can imagine. We have to deal with a lot of that, and it is the pure horror. And I've seen people get out there and just be completely overloaded. Their senses are just totally overloaded. I mean, you're going to an airplane accident, and okay, you're walking toward it, and yeah, that looks like maybe the tail, and the closer you get, you may find that you don't recognize anything. Or if you do, you understand that, well, that's an altimeter, but why is it there? And gosh, there's an HSI, and what is it doing there? And oh, here's the guy's hat. It's all these conflicting senses that you have to deal with, but it's all part of the puzzle, and it's huge. Politics. There's always somebody somewhere that wants to be part of the accident investigation that's really not allowed to be there. And the NTSB has very specific guidelines as to who can be on site. They don't allow attorneys on site or corporate officers, for example, to be there. As you can imagine, they have an ulterior motive sometimes or want to steer the investigation their way or the other. You can't do that. We have to be very objective in our findings and what we're doing there. And politics are always banging on the door, and we always rely on the NTSB investigator in charge to deal with the politicians. Of course, sometimes the family, the people that survived this thing will want to be there and want to see, where their husband or loved one died, and so we make arrangements for them to come on site too. But we have to deal with it. And the media is always looking for 6 o'clock headlines, and it's always difficult to deal with them because they're just in the entertainment business, really. And I guess you can tell I'm not really a fan of the media. I think the news is important, but I think it needs to be objective and not sensational. And the media is always trying to spy on us. We've found them with directional microphones that can go about 1,000 yards, and their cameras are taking pictures of our notes and so on. They're eavesdropping on our conversations, and they broadcast them at the 6 o'clock news. That's actually happened to me. So we're not real fond of the media being out of control like that. And so typically, when they approach us and want to interview us, we're just the team. We always refer them to the NTSB investigator in charge. He is the spokesperson for the investigation. That helps a lot. And a lot of people talk about the inconvenience. Gee, you're in your nice warm bed in Duluth, Minnesota in the middle of winter. It's only 20 below out there, and you got to get up and go somewhere. You're not sure where to an accident. And so a lot of people don't like being inconvenienced, being on call all this time. So that's kind of difficult. Strong sense of humor helps. We called it the gallows humor. I'm sure you've watched Law and Order, some of those TV shows where Lenny Briscoe, the detective, always has a smart aleck remark to make. That's not uncommon, and we're not a bunch of frivolous folks, and we're not that jolly either, but we do have to get through the horror of it all. I call it the ashtray phase of the investigation. You've got to be objective, and you've simply got to be able to get through that terrible, terrible, terrible loss of people. And once you do that, you can do a good job. So sometimes we tend to kid each other, and it sounds pretty sick to outsiders, I would guess, but it keeps us going anyway, and certainly has with me. At the same time, you have to have a lot of compassion. Gee, this could have been me. Poor guy. What's his family going to do? And those questions come at you the whole time you're there, forever. And I don't think I've ever forgotten a single accident I've been to. I can tell you exactly what I saw for years, and I'll probably never get rid of it. So that compassion is always there. There are 4 phases of an accident. As you might imagine, there's the rescue phase. That's when the firemen are there. We always do everything we can to help the victims. And if there's no hope for them, then there's always the possibilities of fire or hazardous things going on. Some of these new aircraft have systems on board like the parachutes, these ballistic parachutes and inflatable restraints. They have some ordnance in them. And if those weren't used in the course of the accident, then they're live ordnance, and we have to deal with that too. The investigation phase comes next, and hopefully the fire department has sealed off the site so that we don't have a lot of folks running around out there. A lot of people like to take souvenirs from accidents. I don't know why. It seems kind of grisly to me, but we need those things to help us determine what happened. And of course, at the end of this, sometimes we call it the recovery phase. We might recover the wreckage right from the site, but more often than not, it's in an inconvenient spot, and so we have to move it someplace where we can examine it in more detail, in more privacy. And so every time you move the wreckage, of course, you're losing evidence. Stuff falls off the truck, or you forgot something at the site, or whatever. And so it is perishable, and we really hate to move things. We like to keep it in situ as long as we can. But the recovery phase is important because it is an inconvenience for the farmer's field where this thing took place, or somebody's house. We need to get it out of there and put it in a place where that we can actually do a professional job taking a look at every little piece. We actually lay it out and try to account for all the parts of the airplane. So the recovery phase is very important. And sometimes the recovery phase happens before the investigation starts. If we can't get there for a day or so and somebody's got to get it off the highway, well, we're not going to see it the way it was when it actually happened. So that's difficult. And finally, the legal phase. When it's all said and done, there's attorneys out there and they want to blame somebody, and we have to deal with that as well. And as investigators, typically we do get deposed and asked to make our comments known to the legal world. So here's a rescue phase. This is not uncommon. In this particular case, it was a fatal, and all you can do is try to put out the fires and just deal with it. I show these lockers, this row of lockers. People say, well, what's it like to do an investigation? I say, well, it's not looking at lockers, but the symbology is here. If you can think of each of those locker doors as a clue or a part of the investigation that you have to do, a possibility, engine failure, fuel failure, whatever, lack of too much air in the tanks, as we say, look at these lockers and consider each of those a clue. And when we get there, all of those locker doors are open. And when the investigation's over, we've needed to have all those doors closed. There might be 2 or 3 left open. That's where we focus our investigation. So there's a lot of things we have to ask questions about and get the answers to. So what does happen when the phone rings? Well, the call can come from anyone, anytime. And if it's an 800 number, you know you hang up. But typically NTSB people will call us and let us know that we need to participate in this thing, and they'll ask us to send somebody there. The very first thing we ask is, can we have party status? And that's granted right then and there or not. And when we get to the site, we do have to fill out a party investigation form that puts us legally into the investigation for the NTSB as the representative for our manufacturer, and that's part of the protocol of what you have to do. But the first thing you do when the phone rings is ask for permission to go. They don't want you traveling halfway across the country if they don't need you. And we don't want to spend the money either, but we're anxious to be there, that's for sure. So the investigator on call has to be prepared to go anywhere, anytime. So you have to have your medical stuff in order. If you're going to go overseas, you've got to have your passport ready and all your tools and stuff that you may need on site ready to go. We call that a go bag. And of course, the very first thing you do is verify that it's a legitimate accident. We've had people call up and they think they're being cute, but they will report an accident, which is really a false alarm. And it really is pretty terrible thing to go through, because we get pretty wound up when there's an accident, as you can imagine. There's a lot to do, and the adrenaline's pumping, and we've got to find transportation, and we don't need a false alarm at that point. So we ask all the appropriate W questions: where, when, who, all that stuff. And we request the status, and then, if we can, if we have time, we'll brief our internal people in the company. Now, we always had carte blanche to launch anytime, anywhere. If we felt it was something we had to go to, we didn't ask questions, and they didn't either. We just left. But if we have time, we try to brief them on what we think happened, you know, at least where it is, what the early reports are, and then we get on out of there. And at Cirrus, we were lucky. We had internal airplanes that could fly us to some of these things. And we also made a policy of the investigator not being the pilot, either coming or going, because we were always a little bit stressed both ways. So we always had somebody from the company fly us there. The internal team works their contacts as well. I mean, we're always looking at the newscasts and trying to get footage and so forth, because sometimes we can learn something just from the film. And a lot of our news folks are really cooperative, and they help us with footage. They're pretty good about that. So we get to the site as soon as we can. And here's Brad Miller, he's running the department now that I'm retired. We call this the well-dressed air safety investigator. He's got this, Brad was a ranger in the Army, and he's not opposed to carrying 80 pounds on his back, plus your clothes that you're going to need, and this is what you look like when you go. Roller bags are really important, and we carry a lot of stuff. You never know where you're going. You don't know if it's going to be an accident, an incident, a fender bender, until sometimes you get there. Once you get on an airliner and you're heading out there, you're out of touch with the real world. The phone calls keep coming in at the company, and so those people will gather all that information, and the minute we touch down, they'll give us a brief on what they've learned. And of course, when you get to the site, the NTSB will brief you. This case was a windstorm. There was no federal oversight or requirement to be there, but this field in Ohio got hit with a big storm, and there were a number of airplanes that had been flipped over and moved around on the airfield. This particular Cirrus was in its protective hangar, and the windstorm picked up the Cirrus and the hangar and deposited it some 100 yards or so down the way, and then the main beam of the hangar came down and pretty much cut the airplane in half. And the owner called me and said, Mike, they're trying to move my airplane. Talk to them. And so I got hold of the airport manager. I said, you know, you don't want to be doing that. Why? We got to get it out of there. I said, well, you know, there's a ballistic recovery system in there, and it only takes a quarter of an inch of movement on the activation handle for that rocket to go off. Didn't know that. So I said, well, don't move it. And there is a picture here. I don't know if you can see it. This arrow is off a little bit, but you can see that one of our investigators, I'll try to get it right there, that's Mark Manning's foot. And we sent him down there, and he is in the process of actually disarming the rocket. And of course, it's in a puddle of gasoline there because it ruptured the tanks and so on. The airplane was totaled. But at least we got some safety on site, and nobody was hurt. But people don't know about these things, and so they tend to make rash decisions in a hurry. They think it's the right thing to do. We often launched on things that weren't covered by the NTSB. At the site, you got to secure the site, preserve evidence, and beware of the hazards which may be present. And there are a lot of them. I mean, you got critters and animals and all kinds of things that you don't think about that might be there. This was a site that I responded to, one of my very first ones. The NTSB called me and asked me to come up to New Jersey, and I said, are you aware that there's a ballistic parachute on that airplane? He said, no, I didn't know that. And I said, well, I think you need to understand we've got perhaps a hazard there. Well, what do you want me to do? I said, well, at least keep everybody out of there till I can get there. Now, this doesn't always happen, but as you can see in this case, there's some pink ribbon around this thing, and it doesn't look much like an airplane, I know. But if you look here, those are my footprints. That I got there about 8 hours later. Nobody had disturbed the site whatsoever. I was the first guy on site. And of course, I found the rocket, which was over by the tree there. And we were in business in about 5 minutes. The rocket was inert, and we were able to get on with the investigation with no further ado. But sometimes there's just nothing. You get out there, it's just this big, vast wasteland, and you and the airplane and the victims, there you are. Or sometimes it can be in a fairly dense environment. This was in Florida, actually. So on the first day on site, what happens? Well, the parties all get together with the NTSB, and he or she, the investigator in charge, will brief everybody on what we know. We'll also review all the rules, what kind of restrictions that there may be that may be applying to this, or the expectations, and what do we expect of you, all right? And of course, we sign the ever-present party form, and the IIC will explain how the investigation will proceed, and also we're given assignments. You'll do this, you'll do that, in addition to all of our normal things. The first thing I would do normally is disarm the rocket and the airbag system, and then deal with the rest of the airframe. Time is short. People think that you're out there forever, and in fact, over a period of time, I averaged it up, we sometimes get no more than about 4 hours on site. There's all kinds of pressures to get this thing done in a hurry, which is our enemy. Time is our enemy there, and so we don't always get the amount of time that we need. So we work quickly and very, very efficiently, I think. So we have a plan, we work the plan, and we try to determine what the priorities are. We condition, like I said, I determine the condition of the Cirrus airframe parachute system and the restraints, inflatable restraints. We walk the site just to get an idea of what we're dealing with. We note the energy path and direction, and right then and there we take what we call contingency photos, because you don't know if your camera's going to run out of batteries or if the cold's going to get to your many cameras that you carry and render them useless. For a while there, we all bought the same kinds of cameras so we could swap batteries back and forth and chargers and so on. And we're still doing that to some extent, but we take a lot of early pictures. We call them contingency photos just so we've got something in case everything falls apart technology-wise. And if we have time and the space, we'll lay out what we think is the wreckage in the shape that the airplane should be, the tail at the back, and so on. And we do an inventory right then and there to try to figure out if we've got all the parts. And if we don't, we go look for them. And if we do, then we review it very carefully. Take detailed notes. And this is a slide I show in some of the presentations. We do have to disarm this stuff. I mean, it is a hazard, and it's unexpended ordnance. And so what the sign says is, I'm a bomb technician. If you see me running, try to keep up. That's almost a joke, but at the same time, pretty serious about what we do. And a lot of firemen, firemen live in the firehouse together. They're a very close-knit team as opposed to police officers, which are fairly independent people, each in their own squad car and so on. Firemen tend to spend a lot of time in the dorm, if you will, and they do like to play pranks on each other. And so we've got to kind of watch them carefully. I always show them this slide to get them aware of the fact that we really don't joke around when we're dealing with ordnance. We try to document everything before it's moved, if possible. There's always a big hurry to move things. So we ask the firemen to make sketches and take videos if they can before we get there. And You know, they're getting pretty good about that. A lot of the trucks have video cameras mounted right in them, and we can see what all they're doing. And we also try to line up these shots with a prominent landmark, because just looking at a picture with no reference points can be very difficult to figure out later. And take multiple shots. We average about 1,000 pictures apiece on a site. I know it's a lot to look at, but you're always missing that one shot you wish you'd taken, you know. A lot of these airplanes don't have voice recorders or the digital black boxes. We're getting better about the black box part, but we're still not there. We're not at the airline 1,000-channel boxes anymore. We're not there yet. So we have to do it the old-fashioned way. And we have to, for example, look at these marks on a tree to see if we can figure out what the angle of impact was from either a propeller or a wheel or perhaps a wing or something like that. And we also look at the registration number, who's it registered to. We'll figure that out very quickly. Look at the data plate and try to figure out who owns it. This is an interesting story that Jeff Gazzetti, who's one of the higher-ups in NTSB now, but when I first met him, he was an investigator with Cessna. And he said, well, you know, you need to take a model with you of the airplane if you can, because a lot of times when you're talking to a witness, they don't know all the terminology for aircraft and all the things that we do. A loop and a roll and a whifferdille and a Lumpshavak is all the same thing to them. And so if you put a model in their hands, they can sort of trace the path of the airplane, show you what it was doing, and you can make your own conclusions from that. And that works out pretty well. So we went out and bought these airplanes. Now, they didn't look like Cirruses, but they were durable, metal ones, low wing, with the engine in front sort of thing. Jeff had cautioned us that he had a rather expensive model that he took to this particular accident when he was with Cessna. And he gave the model to one of the witnesses, and he said, well, would you trace the path of the aircraft for us, sir? And the guy said, well, sure. Here you go. It went up, and then it crashed. And he said, boy, that model cost me a lot of money. So we learned early on to buy lots of cheap ones that were fairly durable. At the end of the day, first day, you wrap up the meeting, you get everybody together. Well, what did we learn? And we try to review all the things that we know and what's missing, and we draw up a battle plan for the next day. And typically, we'll all go out and have some kind of dinner together if we try to. I know it's tough to do, but we may not get together until 9, 10 o'clock that night, but we try to have a little bit of time to kind of put the accident aside, just to relax just a little bit and get ready for the next day. You're working a lot of long hours out there, and it's pretty tough on everybody. And this whole process can take several days. We've been on site for a week at a time sometimes. I know I said 4 hours earlier, but that's an average. The myths, there are lots of them out there. The plane always blows up and burns. With my experience with Cirrus, less than a third of the serious accidents had fire involved. It's made out of fiberglass, it's going to burn. No, it doesn't always. The plane doesn't blow up either. The engine always sputters and quits before impact. Well, there's some truth to that. It doesn't mean that there's a bad engine. It means that the pilot's probably pulling the mixture back, so, to minimize problems. But the witnesses always say that it sputters and quits before impact. Read the next accident report you get, and you'll hear that. The pilot in command was the best pilot ever. And we know that a huge percentage of accidents are human factors oriented. Not necessarily a bad pilot, but he had a bad day perhaps. And so that's a tough one, because you're dealing with the family, and they think he was the ace of the base, and he didn't even do a pre-flight, so you never know. Anyway, those myths are important, and we also laugh at this one. One person always solves the mystery. You get the guy with the golden BB. Aha! I know what it is. Now, I don't think that's ever happened to us. We always do it as a team, and we work together, and we kind of evolve to the answer. That's how it works. And of course, black boxes aren't black. A lot of people don't know that. These are flight data recorders from airliners. And the recovery phase is, like I say, sometimes precedes the investigation, or sometimes is after we've been there. This particular Cirrus went into a river, and of course we had to pull it out after disarming all the goodies, and the airplane was underwater at the time, so it was bobbing up and down, and we only have 1/4 of an inch of cable to play with on these rockets. Cockpit and fuselage was full of gasoline, and there I was in my rowboat all by myself out there, so it was interesting. But it was important to know that when I showed up, they all knew, all the first responders had heard that there was a ballistic parachute on board, and they said, we're sure glad you're here, and they were all standing back, and there's your boat. go do. So we did. So the recovery phase means that the airplane is going to be moved probably again, and that you've got the possibility of losing evidence. We get into a lot of component testing. Sometimes it's pretty rude and crude. We'll hook the fuel pump up to a battery to see if it pumps, and we'll check certain things that we can on site. We'll check the engine for thumb pressure and so forth. We try to get a general feel for what's going on. And at the end of the day, again, we're going to review the facts summary from each of the investigators that are there. Sometimes you'll spend a couple days just building a road to get to the thing. This is one we did in California. It was in a 1,000-foot valley, and we actually had to build a road to get the tractors and trucks in there to be able to get the wreckage out. So then you transport it to a storage facility, typically, where it's stored. And we also do a fair amount of layout investigation right then and there. But it's stored for some period of time until insurance people can look at it. And, of course, the legal folks will have a look at it when it's all over. This is a typical wreckage layout at one of these facilities. This one's in Arizona. And you can see that the white part of it there is the cowling. It's heading to the right. And the rest of it is the spar and the rest of the airplane. It was all there, believe it or not. The rest of it was on the trailer, and we found every piece of it. So when we get home, what do we do then? Well, the accident investigation continues. We have to brief the senior management on what we found, and of course the NTSB investigation is ongoing, and then we share all the data with all the other parties. We exchange pictures and preliminary reports. We all talk a lot, and then we'll send our preliminary report to the investigator in charge, and at that point we write our own report internally. They're not different. They're just ours is pretty lengthy. Our prelim report to the NTSB is fairly short. And we sometimes have to do other trips. We average about 3 trips per accident. They might be to forensic investigations, engine teardown investigations, that sort of thing. It's what we do. We look at everything, simply everything. Engine teardowns, autopilots, fuel systems, electrical components, the structure, landing gear, avionics, it's all there. And it's all important because it could be part of the problem. This is a blue engine box some of you may recognize. This is what the Continental Company uses to transport their engines in. And typically, if we're going to look at the engine in detail, the box comes to a site. The FAA takes custody of the engine, puts the engine in the box and seals it, and is custodian of that evidence. They'll send it down to the Continental Company in Alabama. Mobile is where their home office is. And that will be placed in quarantine until we can schedule a time for that to be examined. And all the parties from the investigation are invited to come to that. We always go. And so we're there with the investigator in charge, and of course I'll be there. And then the folks from Continental will be there. They have some expert mechanics who are really good at taking these things apart. And we will do it step by step by step, right down to the nuts and bolts. Here's what it might look like. This one was involved in a fire, and it's all sealed, of course. And we take it right down to the various components. Here we are testing some spark plugs, for example. This was a MCU, or electrical components box. That arrow is off again, but just below the body of the arrow, you'll see a difference in color there. That's a piece of the PC or the card that actually burned and has a discontinuity there. So the initial report schedule that the NTSB will put out, you can find that on www.faa.gov. The FAA usually reports it first, and that's on the web for about 10 days. It's usually gone in 10 days. It'll be on there in 1 to 3 days, and sometimes this is the first notification that we'll have that something happened. Sometimes you get a little fender bender, you know, somebody hit a taxi light or whatever, but it could also be something more. Then the NTSB on www.ntsb.gov, on the aviation portion of it, within 10 days, they will put in a preliminary report. Now, prelims are typically wrong. I mean, they might get the place and the time sort of correct, and you've probably read them, you know, on such and such a date, such and such happened. But it is a preliminary report. It's just a report that they're working on it, and the details are pretty sketchy. They're pretty short, maybe 2 or 3 paragraphs, and so you're not going to get a lot from that other than the fact that, you know, a Cirrus went down in Allentown or someplace. And then, of course, the final report that the NTSB does can be on the public docket and on the web as well. Now, as the time goes on, you're going to see a preliminary report, then a factual report, and so on from the NTSB. And eventually, it could take 6 months, it could take 2 years, depending on the severity and the complexity of the accident. But you keep checking the web and you'll see if they've got something new on there. And in the end, you'll find that they will publish the probable cause as well. Sometimes they'll have a public hearing, and the probable cause is announced at that. These are some of the larger accidents that you might see with airliners and so forth. I don't think we've ever had one. And in the probable cause, you know, you can agree or disagree, but there it is. Always on the web. Take a look there. We'll also take a look at this thing from an internal company point of view. We'll look at this report and say, well, you know, this didn't cause the accident. We don't have any reason to believe that this was bad, but we did find something here that broke that really shouldn't have broken in this case. And we'll take a look at that and see if there's something we need to improve in the product. And so we do that internally. We'll go have a meeting and kind of review the accident and bring in some of the engineers and people that can make some decisions and review the fact that this broke and we need to maybe fix it. Even though it didn't cause the accident, it could be a potential. So we have critical people at this one, and I think each company has their own process. Ours sort of changes from time to time, but eventually we'll get around to writing this report, which would look something like this. These reports can be pretty detailed and lengthy. There's an awful lot of work involved there. And finally, the legal phase. Always somebody wants to sue you for something, and you have to deal with it, you know. And so we usually first see that we're going to get sued when we're asked to produce documents, which we do, and then we have to go to wreckage inspections. So once more, they'll drag the wreckage out of storage, and now the attorneys can take a look at it, and we always go as well, in case we missed something the first time around, just to make sure that we didn't, and to you know, verify everything. Also keep everybody honest, and we will also be deposed by the opposing attorneys. And of course, we get into more component testing. Now, these aren't necessarily the components that broke or we found in the accident, but it could be an exemplar fuel pressure gauge or a pump or something, and we'll be doing some testing. There's always the contention that something failed. This can take years, and it goes on and on and on. Wreckage inspection starts with a basket of parts like this. We'll lay it out like that, and you know, it goes on and on. Anyway, we want you to have a good day when you're flying. We want you to keep the shiny side up. And I may be a little early, so we may have time for questions. I don't know if there are questions on the floor. We have a process. Walt's got the mic.
Two questions. Dates for the FAA and NTSB dates that appear in the computer. Is that do they appear on the date they are published or listed there, or the actual accident date? It's February 6th or whatever.
Yes, they have the actual accident date there, and as much detail as the report can give you is there. These reports are refined and edited to a fairly well, and they're pretty easy to read. Some of them are pretty long, but they're as factual and as honest and straightforward as they can be. I think they do a great job. It's a very difficult job to do.
Yes, I had an engine out at one point about in November of 2007, and it was a piston failure, and the engine kept running long enough for me to find an airport and safely land.
That's a good thing.
Yes, I landed as if it landed as if nothing had happened, as if nothing went wrong at all. And I'm heard that, you know, that's good news and bad news.
Yes, sir.
And the downside is that since I landed and there was no loss of life or property, the NTSB could care less. They never came and investigated it. I was told that the FAA was coming. The maintenance shop where I landed sent me home, said, get out of here, we'll call the FAA, we'll take care of everything. 2 days later, I showed up and said, well, did they show up? And I was told that they had, but I never saw a report or anything, or any record or anything.
You probably need to contact the local FSDO there to see what it is they found, because the FAA will come out to these, we would call something like that a fender bender, no offense. But obviously something did break, and there could have been a good reason for it, and we want to know what that was. Why did that piston fail? And you know. Okay. Yeah. Analytical summary, yep. Well, typically there's, you know, the FAA has a lot more resources than the NTSB. Just to give you a kind kind of a comparison. The FAA has over 50,000 employees in 100 regional offices, okay, FSDOs. The NTSB is by law limited to 500 employees, most of which reside in Washington. There are 10 regions and about 39, I think right now, maybe 42 active accident investigators. 42. They're pretty thin. So I don't know if that report would be on the FAA website, probably not, but if you go to the FSDO of where you were, they'll cough it up for you, I'm sure. Yes, sir. What do I mean by party status? Party status means that you're a party to the investigation or a member of the investigative team. It's a crummy term. We're not having any fun out there, I can assure you. But party means you're a party to the investigation, and it's a legal term, and it's part of the document that we have to sign. It's called a party status agreement, and we do have to actually sign it to become a member of the investigative team, if you will. They don't pay us. No, we're still paid by our home manufacturer or home employer, but we do act on their behalf. If they want us to go do something, we all do it. And we do have our individual priorities, but we don't do anything without their knowledge or permission. It is their investigation. Make no mistake about that. And because we can be invited, we can also be uninvited. So once we're out there, if we do something wrong and you never want to do that, they'll ask you to go home. That would be a very, very long day in any accident investigator's career, is to be asked to leave an accident, trust me.
Mike, we have a question over here.
Yes, sir.
Yes, can you comment on the role that logbooks, airframe, and power plant logbooks play in an investigation, and then what would happen if there was a gap, if there's one logbook missing, for example?
Well, any documentation is hugely important in any investigation, and we do our utmost, very best to capture or contain or get hold of all of it. While we sometimes can't necessarily get hold of the actual log, we do look for facsimiles or copies of them. Typically the FAA will help us do that. They have a lot of this on file, but sometimes people will carry their logbooks with them in the aircraft, for example, including their own pilot log. And in the crash, sometimes that evidence is destroyed, burned up or broken or lost or whatever. Or it gets rained on or it's underwater and destroyed. And so any kind of missing documents or any holes in those chain of words, if you will, really hurt us a lot, because there are questions that come about then. And we have to do what we can to fill in the blanks. If the guy took it to his typical shop, we may not have the logbook, but we'll have the mechanic. And that's a good thing. I've got 5 more minutes left. If anyone else has a question, I'll be glad to answer it at this time, or you can see me afterwards in the darkened studio where we can chat one-on-one.
As far as going back to the accident, seeing when one occurs and trying to find the historical weather, what's a good site for us to find historical weather data near an accident site?
That's a really good question, and I don't remember right now. I'll tell you why. There are vendors out there that you can pay to look up weather information that they store. And you can go back to a given date to these people and say, okay, on this date or the days preceding or following it, can you give us the weather for Atlanta, Georgia, and the area? And they'll cough it up. They'll give you everything that was ever published or metered. And those professional people do a really good job. They'll send us a packet about that thick, and you can get very accurate weather that way. That's how we do it now. I don't know of a site that's particularly good at it right now. They're not cheap. Yes,
no, the big packet of reports that you showed up there, real thick ones, on where do you store them and how long do you store them for life, and do you transfer them to
Well, each company
microfiche,
has their own policy on document retention, and you're supposed to have that down legally before you try to keep them or not keep them. That has to be in your company's policies. They're stored in a, as you can imagine, a safe environment. For example, when we take pictures, the original card that comes out of the camera is what we save. We make a copy of that for our investigation purposes. So all the original stuff is preserved, and it will vary from company to company how long it's kept.
I'm curious, I'm sure in some investigations the team has a consensus, and perhaps in other cases there's disagreement or ambiguity. So Are there cases where the NTSB ultimately comes out with a report that perhaps you might not agree with in entirety?
Absolutely. Not very often, but probable causes have been changed. A friend of mine was involved in an accident right here at Lakeland, as a matter of fact. And in time, he didn't agree with the probable cause, and he took it up channels, and I have to say I helped him. But we opened it up, got it opened up again, and all the facts were reviewed, and in fact, the probable cause was changed from pilot error. So it can change. They say probable cause, but they're always open and subject to reinterpretation. I think that's my cue. I guess we can still talk.
Is there a legal requirement for survivors to provide documentation like aircraft logbooks and pilot logs, or is that something that is open to interpretation by the survivors?
Well, you know, people, you know, a death of a pilot or any loved one is a difficult thing for any family to go through. And we've had situations where they said, yes, we'll give you everything that Charlie had. We'll give you his tools and access to his shop and all his drawings and stuff. And later on, went to follow up on that, and they wouldn't let us have it. So it can vary from place to place. It's very helpful to have the documentation to see, you know, what happened there. If he's got the logs, it's very, very helpful. If not, then we have to go about other ways to finding it. For example, sometimes you know people that flew with him or friends or so forth. Sometimes they'll come forth with information. Somebody may have helped him build the airplane, for example, or worked on it, or did the annual, and so you can get the information kind of in a different way. It's best to get the written document, but sometimes the family just won't cough it up. So I think, you know, it's a very important piece of it, but we don't always get it, again, back to probable cause. I really appreciate your help today, and the fact that you came out here so early in the morning to listen to us. And if there's something we can do to help you, don't hesitate to call. I'm retired now, but I'm still working at it. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Walt.
Stay right here.
Stay right here.
Now we know what you do when the phone rings.
That's right.
Does it ring very much?
It used to ring a lot.
Oh, that's bad in that business.
Well, sometimes it's the same, you know, same accident and 14 people call you, so.
I understand that's like on the highway.
Yep.
Yeah, I was on the side of the highway for 16 hours. Nobody called.
There you go.
Yeah, I don't get no respect.
You and Rodney.
If there's anybody has any questions, please come up and see Mike. You might have a personal question.
I'll be glad to answer it.
There's a lot of information out there, and particularly if you start at ntsb.gov, it'll lead you back to some of these other sites and accidents.
Yes. Thank you.
Stay right here.
Stay right here. We're still on camera. Okay. Live and in color. Hello there, young feller.
I'm a member of the American Banana Society.
Okay.
I appreciate your contribution to the newsletter, and not newsletter, but magazine.
Okay.
I wonder how you have the time to do that.
I'll tell you, it's very simple. There are 2 Mike Bushes.